Captain Jack and his fearless crew aboard the Crimson Dagger embark on a perilous journey into the fabled Shoals of Perdition, seeking a legendary map said to hold the key to untold power and doom. Battling rival pirates, ghostly ships, and a monstrous sea serpent with eyes of molten gold, they must confront ancient whispers that could break them or set them free. Will Captain Jack uncover the heart of the sea's deepest secret, or will he and his crew become part of its cursed legend? What price must be paid to escape the chains of the past? The horizon was a jagged line of storm-wrought skies and endless seething waves. Captain Jack stood at the helm of the Crimson Dagger, his sun-weathered hand steady against the carved mahogany wheel. His hazel eyes glinted with the fire of a man who had seen both glory and ruin, now fixed on the cracked, yellowed parchment before him, a map that spoke of doom and fortune in equal measure. The crew gathered on the main deck, voices mingling with the snap of sails and the briny hiss of the sea. Each sailor, from weathered gunner to agile deckhand, bore skin kissed by the sun and marked by countless journeys. Yet today their talk was hushed, weighed by tales of the Abyssal Serpent, a guardian of the legendary Whispering Deep. Jack's eyes swept over them before shifting to Isabella, the navigator with a sharp tongue and sharper eyes. Her hair was bound in a braid streaked with the salt of the sea, and secrets lurked in the way her gaze danced over the map. By her side, Elias, the quartermaster with arms like coiled rope, studied the parchment with barely concealed ambition. "Mark my words, Captain," Elias spoke, his voice rough like the edge of a cutlass. "No soul who's sailed past the tempest's maw has ever returned whole." Jack's smile was a blade's gleam. "Then we'd best return more than whole, wouldn't we?" The crew's silence crackled with tension, broken only by the sudden cry from the crow's nest. "Ship on the horizon!" All eyes turned. Through the mist, sails of an ashen hue rose like ghostly apparitions. A chill skittered down Jack's spine. It wasn't just a ship. It was Drummond's Sable Reaver, the iron-fisted rival who would gut them all for a chance at the map. "Battle stations!" Isabella's shout was whip-crack sharp, sending the crew scrambling. Cannon hatches slammed open, the gleam of polished iron catching the gray daylight. As the first boom of cannon fire thundered, Jack stole a glance at the map. The whispers were there again, faint and spectral, promising treasure, betrayal, and the wrath of something more ancient than the tides. The Crimson Dagger cut through the churning sea, a defiant streak of crimson against the advancing specter. Drummond's flag flew high, a sigil of death and conquest, its shadow clawing at the horizon. The battle was not just for gold or glory, but for survival against an enemy woven with betrayal. Jack shouted, "Raise the black, let's show them the sea's true fury!" The crew roared, an echo swallowed by the approaching storm. But as cannon fire roared, splitting the sky with fire and fury, a sound far more sinister rose from beneath the waves, a deep guttural rumble like the earth itself groaning in torment. The eyes of the crew widened in disbelief as an immense scaled shadow moved under the waters, circling like a noose drawn taut. Jack's blood chilled. The whispers were no longer confined to the map. They were here, and they had just awakened something that no man was meant to face. "Hold fast, you lot." Jack's voice rang through the chaos as the shadow surged upward, breaking the sea with a roar that froze hearts and silenced cannon fire. A battle had begun, not only against Drummond, but against a guardian as old as the ocean itself. The world seemed to freeze as the monstrous head of the Abyssal Serpent burst from beneath the roiling sea. Its scales, dark as storm clouds, shimmered with a deadly sheen, each as large as a man's shield. Golden eyes, fierce and unblinking, swept over the ships locked in their deadly dance, and its roar resonated deep, shaking the bones of all who heard it. Waves lashed the deck of the Crimson Dagger, sending sailors scrambling to grip anything solid. Captain Jack's voice sliced through the chaos. "Elias, aim starboard cannons, now!" Elias hesitated, eyes darting between the rival ship closing in fast and the creature that loomed like the embodiment of a sailor's worst nightmare. Finally, his instincts kicked in, and he shouted commands to the gunners who loaded the cannons with trembling hands. On the Sable Reaver, Captain Drummond stood as immovable as the figurehead on his ship. His dark coat billowed in the wind as he smirked, revealing teeth sharpened to points. "So the stories are true," he whispered, eyes gleaming with a mad light. He raised a fist and his crew sprang into action, oblivious or uncaring of the danger beneath. Isabella raced to Jack's side, eyes wide with urgency. "Captain, if we don't maneuver out of this, we're done for. The serpent—" "It's here for the map," Jack interrupted, his jaw set like iron. "And so is Drummond." He glanced at her, the tiniest flicker of something vulnerable passing over his face. "But we're not giving it up. Ready the sails." The Crimson Dagger groaned as the wind caught its sails, lurching away from the oncoming maw of the serpent. Water spewed from the beast's jaws, crashing onto the deck in a torrent that swept 2 sailors overboard. Screams erupted, mingling with the splintering of wood as Drummond's ship fired a volley of cannonballs. One struck their bow, splinters flying like lethal shards. "Fire!" Elias roared, and the Crimson Dagger answered with a bellow of smoke and flame. The shot found its mark, punching a hole through the Sable Reaver's hull. The cheer from the crew was short-lived as the serpent reared again, coiling around both ships with unnatural grace. Isabella gripped Jack's arm. "There's no outrunning it. We need to use the map. Invoke its secrets before the serpent tears us all apart." Jack's eyes narrowed, the tension between choice and fate tightening like a noose. The whispers from the map surged, louder, more insistent. Words, no longer faint, curled into coherent speech. To break the coil, one must shatter the chain. Drummond's voice cut across the deck as he leaped onto the boarding ramp between the ships, a cutlass in hand, eyes locked on Jack. "Hand it over, Jack, before the sea claims us both." His crew roared behind him, ready for the bloodshed he promised. Before Jack could respond, the serpent's massive tail smashed down, obliterating the space between the ships and sending men sprawling. The beast's golden eyes fixed on Jack as though it could see into the very marrow of his soul. With a grim nod, Jack made his choice. "Isabella, take the wheel. Elias, with me." He drew his cutlass, its blade catching the light of the encroaching storm, and surged forward to meet Drummond, the only barrier between them and the map's secret that could save, or doom, them all. As the 2 captains clashed, the serpent let out a roar that made the air tremble, and from the dark waters the ghosts of Valerio's lost crew shimmered into sight, their hollow eyes brimming with a warning that no mortal could ignore. The Crimson Dagger and the Sable Reaver found themselves not only bound in battle, but caught in the wrath of an ancient power that wanted its domain left untouched. In that moment, with swords clashing and the sea itself rebelling, it was clear to all that the map was more than just a promise of treasure. It was a key, and it came with a price no one was prepared to pay. The clash of blades rang out over the roar of the sea, punctuated by the deafening crash of the Abyssal Serpent's tail as it struck the water, sending plumes high into the storm-laden sky. Captain Jack's cutlass met Drummond's with a metallic shriek, the force of their blows reverberating through the battered deck of the Crimson Dagger. "Still playing the hero, Jack?" Drummond sneered, his eyes glinting with savage delight. He pressed forward, muscles rippling as he drove Jack back step by step. "You know how this ends. With you at the bottom of the sea." Jack's breath came in ragged gasps, but his gaze never wavered. "If that beast doesn't drag you there first, Drummond." With a sudden twist, Jack deflected the blow and slashed at Drummond's arm, drawing a growl of pain. Before either captain could recover, a wave thundered over the side of the ship, almost sweeping them off their feet. Isabella's voice cut through the chaos as she fought to keep the Crimson Dagger from being crushed by the serpent's relentless circling. "Hold fast. We need more wind or we'll be wrapped like fish in a net." Elias darted across the slick deck, his eyes locked on Jack and Drummond. He hesitated, the gleam of ambition burning brighter than his loyalty. With the map hidden in the pocket of his coat, he could feel the whispers coiling through his mind, tempting him with promises of unimaginable power. Jack's eyes caught Elias's shift in focus, a flash of understanding passing between them. Before Jack could call out, Drummond lunged, the point of his cutlass slicing through the gap between them. Jack sidestepped, using the momentum to kick Drummond's blade away, sending it skittering across the deck. But there was no time for victory. The serpent's massive head loomed over them, its eyes glowing like molten gold, and the ship groaned beneath its weight as it coiled tighter. The ghostly figures of Valerio's lost crew stood motionless on the opposite deck, their translucent forms vibrating with a silent message. "Elias!" Jack shouted, desperation sharpening his voice. "The map! Read the words aloud." Elias's hand trembled as he retrieved the map, its worn edges fraying beneath his touch. The whispers crescendoed, now a chorus of urgency. Shatter the chain and claim your breath, bind the beast or share its death. The serpent's roar punctuated the final word, shaking the masts and rattling the cannonballs in their holds. Drummond, eyes narrowing, took advantage of the distraction, lunging for Elias. The quartermaster twisted away, slipping on the soaked deck and sprawling into the path of Isabella, who grabbed his arm with an iron grip. "Do it, Elias, before it's too late," she shouted. Sweat mingled with seawater on Elias's brow as he forced himself to speak, the ancient words clawing their way from his throat. As he uttered the last syllable, the serpent paused mid-strike, its eyes shifting from rage to something resembling recognition. For an eternal heartbeat, silence reigned. And then, the creature's eyes flared brighter, beams of golden light shooting out across the sea, lancing into the storm clouds above. The ghosts on the sable reaver shimmered, mouths opening in a unified, voiceless scream. Drummond recoiled, a flicker of fear betraying his bravado as his ship shuddered beneath him. The Crimson Dagger quaked as an invisible force lifted it, pushing it away from the serpent's crushing grip. Wind whipped the sails into a frenzy, propelling the ship out of the serpent's coil. But the sable reaver wasn't so fortunate. The serpent turned its head with a deliberate, predatory grace and lashed its tail through Drummond's ship, splintering it in a rain of shattered timbers and panicked cries. Drummond's eyes met Jack's one last time, a mixture of hatred and unwilling admiration, before he disappeared into the depths. "Captain," Isabella called, breaking the spell that held Jack motionless. The serpent's gaze shifted to the Crimson Dagger, but there was no rage, only a deep, ancient sorrow. The whispers softened, fading like the last echoes of a chant, as the serpent sank below the waves, the sea closing over it with a final thunderous crash. The deck was littered with debris and silence. Ghostly forms flickered, dissolving into the mist as if released from some ancient pact. The storm dissipated as quickly as it had come, leaving only the gentle lap of the waves and the ragged breathing of the surviving crew. Jack lowered his sword, the weight of victory and loss sinking into his bones. Elias met his eyes, the map now lifeless in his trembling hands. The promise of power was gone, leaving only questions and the memory of golden eyes that spoke of mysteries yet to be understood. Isabella turned the wheel, guiding them into the morning light breaking on the horizon. "What now, Captain?" she asked, her voice steady but weary. Jack's gaze drifted over the calm sea where the ripples still whispered secrets. "We set a course," he said softly, "for answers." And as the Crimson Dagger sailed on, battered but unbroken, the shadow of the serpent's legacy lingered beneath the waves, a reminder that the ocean held secrets far deeper than any man dared imagine. The morning sun cast its golden light across the endless expanse of sea, glistening on the gentle crests like 1,000 tiny stars. The Crimson Dagger sailed forward, its sails patched and streaked with the salt and strain of the recent encounter. The crew worked in silence, their movements efficient yet subdued, the echoes of battle still heavy on their minds. Captain Jack stood at the bow, eyes fixed on the horizon, as though it held the answer to every question the sea had whispered to him. The map that had led them into the heart of danger now lay in Elias's hands, its surface dull, the whispers that once pulsed through its veins now silenced. Isabella approached, her boots thudding softly on the damp planks. Her dark eyes searched Jack's face, finding the tension carved into the lines at the corners of his mouth. "The men are restless, Captain. They know the serpent spared us, but they don't understand why." Jack turned, the wind brushing back his long auburn-streaked hair. "Neither do I," he admitted, the confession biting at his pride. "But I do know that map is more than just a scrap of legend. It led us to the serpent, and it may lead us to answers about Valerio's fate." Elias, who had been listening from the shadows of the mainmast, stepped forward, the map clutched tightly in his hand. His knuckles whitened around it, a trace of resentment flickering in his eyes. "Answers. Aye. But at what cost, Captain? We've lost good men. And whatever's in this map is more than gold. It's a curse waiting to be claimed." Before Jack could respond, a shout from the crow's nest cut through the calm. "Sails on the horizon, coming fast from the north." Every head snapped up, the air crackling with sudden tension. Jack's gaze narrowed, catching sight of the dark specks growing larger against the sky. These ships moved with a unity that spoke not of pirates, but of the Navy, a fleet that meant only trouble. The Crimson Dagger had earned its fair share of attention, and it seemed the sea itself was not the only one with eyes fixed on its captain. "Isabella, prepare the ship to change course. Elias, rally the crew," Jack barked, his mind already calculating escape routes. But Isabella's hand on his arm stopped him cold. "It's too late," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're moving to box us in." As if to confirm her words, the glint of sunlight caught on the brass fittings of the lead ship, a frigate flying the banner of Commodore Hawthorne, a man known for his relentless pursuit of pirate vessels. The tales of his wrath had made many a sailor curse their stars and choose the noose over capture. Elias's face darkened, eyes darting between the approaching ships and Jack. "They won't parley, Captain. They'll string us up and take the map." "Not if we beat them to it," Jack said, a reckless gleam in his eye. He turned to Isabella, who looked as if she might argue, then nodded instead, her jaw set with the same determination. "We run, but we don't head for open waters. We need to lose them where they can't follow." Elias's brows knitted. "And where's that, Captain?" Jack's smile was a thin, dangerous line. "The Shoals of Perdition." A collective gasp rippled through the crew. The shoals were a labyrinth of jagged rocks and hidden currents, where legends claimed ghostly ships sailed alongside the living, luring them to their doom. Isabella's eyes narrowed. Only a madman would try to navigate those waters. "Good thing," Jack said, turning back to the wheel. "I'm just the right kind of mad." With a sharp command, the sails were unfurled, and the Crimson Dagger caught the wind. The ship veered sharply, carving a path away from the fleet that now gave chase, the gun ports of the Navy frigates already yawning open like the mouths of hungry beasts. The wind roared in the crew's ears, and the sea beneath them seemed to groan as if in protest. The Shoals of Perdition rose on the horizon, dark shapes jutting out of the water like the teeth of a giant. The crew tightened their grips on ropes and railings, eyes wide as the ship charged toward the maze of death and superstition. As they neared the shoals, a mist began to rise, curling around the ship's hull and masking the rocks that waited hungrily for the careless. Jack shouted over the din, "Elias, keep an eye on the depths. Isabella, stay with me. One wrong move and we'll be splinters." The ship entered the shoals, the creaking of its timbers a song of protest. The frigate slowed, their captains hesitant to chase into the legend-haunted waters. But Jack's gamble had only just begun. The mist thickened, and from it came the faint, eerie glow of lights not made by human hands. Ghostly forms flickered at the edges of vision, ships that shouldn't be there. Sails tattered and masts splintered but moving as if propelled by forces unseen. Isabella's hand tightened on the wheel, her knuckles white. "Jack, what in all the seas have we stumbled into?" The map in Elias's hand grew cold, the faintest whisper threading through the rising wind. A voice not his own, hollow and relentless, murmured, "The chain is not yet broken. The heart must be found." The Crimson Dagger sailed deeper, the Navy's ships receding like a memory into the fog. But before the crew could breathe a sigh of relief, a ship emerged from the mist before them, spectral and ragged, its crew of silent phantoms staring with eyes that shone like forgotten gold. Jack's eyes widened. The ghost ship of Valerio himself had found them, and the stakes had just been raised beyond the realm of the living. The ghost ship loomed out of the mist, its timbers cloaked in dark algae and seaweed that draped like the tattered robes of forgotten monarchs. Its sails hung in strips, and beneath the eerie glow of spectral lights, the figures of Valerio's long-lost crew stood motionless, their eyes blazing like golden embers. Silence fell over the Crimson Dagger, broken only by the creak of ropes and the shallow, ragged breaths of the men and women who now stood on the precipice of fear. Captain Jack felt his chest tighten. The stories were true. Valerio's ship hadn't just vanished into the shoals. It had become a part of them, a sentinel that stood between the living and whatever lay at the heart of the legend. Jack's fingers flexed on the wheel as the ghostly ship drifted closer, its movement smooth and unnatural, like a predator stalking its prey. Isabella's voice trembled but held steady. "What do we do, Jack? That ship doesn't sail by any rules we know." Jack swallowed, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. The map had been their guide, a tool to control their fate, but now it felt like a chain tightening around their necks. Elias stepped up, his face pale as the mist that surrounded them. He held the map out, the ink faintly glowing once more. "The heart must be found," Elias repeated, the whispers swirling around him like a storm. This isn't just a treasure map, Jack. It's a key to end this or become part of it forever. The spectral ship halted within range and the dead crew moved as one, their eyes fixed on the Crimson Dagger, their silence more terrifying than any war cry. Then, a single figure stepped forward, clad in the salt-worn rags of a captain's coat, a crown of bone upon his brow. Captain Valerio, or what was left of him, lifted a skeletal hand, his voice reverberating across the water like the toll of a distant bell. "Who dares disturb the prison of the deep?" Valerio's voice was as hollow as a conch shell, and with every word the mist seemed to tighten like a shroud. Jack stepped forward, his cutlass held at his side but ready. "Captain Jack of the Crimson Dagger, seeking that which you guard." His voice did not waver. The crew needed strength now, if ever. Valerio's eyes narrowed, their glow intensifying. "The map speaks true, yet it binds you all to the fate of the drowned." His gaze fell on Elias, who shuddered, as the whispers in the air twisted into words only he could hear. "Break the chain, or let the sea claim you." Before Jack could press further, the silence shattered with a roar as the Abyssal Serpent breached the water behind them, scales glistening with storm and sea. Its golden eyes locked on Valerio's ship, as if recognizing a rival that had once dared defy its dominion. The crew of the Crimson Dagger burst into action. "Cannons!" Elias shouted, breaking free of his daze. Gunner hands scrambled to load, aiming at both phantom ship and beast as chaos erupted. The serpent twisted in the water, its powerful tail smashing against the waves and sending sprays high enough to drench both vessels. Valerio's ship surged forward, moving like a shadow across the water, its crew of phantoms taking up ghostly arms. Isabella spun the wheel, teeth gritted. "Hold tight, or we'll be dashed to pieces." The serpent's head darted forward, its maw opening wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth like ivory scimitars. Jack leaped, grasping a rope and swinging out of the path as the beast's teeth crashed into the foredeck, splintering it with an explosion of wood and water. Screams rang out as sailors were thrown overboard or clung desperately to the rigging. Valerio raised both hands, a golden light emanating from his bony chest, matching the glow in the serpent's eyes. "Your fate was sealed the moment you entered these waters." His voice cracked with the force of the sea itself, and a sudden pulse surged through the mist, thickening it until vision blurred and shapes danced like shadows in a nightmare. Jack landed hard on the main deck, breath punched from his lungs, but adrenaline surged, pushing him forward. He scrambled to Elias, who clutched the map as if it burned him. "Read it again. Whatever binds this place, it needs to be broken." Elias looked at him, eyes wide with a mix of terror and revelation. "It's not enough to read it, Captain. We have to take it to the heart, the true heart of the serpent." He pointed past the beast, beyond the ghost ship, to where the water gleamed with a peculiar, phosphorescent glow. "There!" Jack nodded, heart thundering. "Then we make for it." He turned to Isabella. "Can you thread the serpent?" Her eyes were fierce despite the fear. "You doubt me, Jack." With a grim smile he barked, "Then show me what a real navigator can do." The Crimson Dagger surged forward, the sea erupting around them as the serpent lunged and Valerio's ship pursued, a spectral echo of battles fought long before. Cannon fire ripped through the air, the flash of explosions lighting the mist like sudden stars. The ghostly crew leaped from their ship, landing on the Crimson Dagger with weapons that shimmered like starlight, and the battle was no longer one of man against nature, but man against the very stories that had birthed them. Jack swung his cutlass, its edge meeting the intangible blade of a phantom, sparks dancing in the eerie light. Elias, his voice clear and defiant, recited the words from the map as they approached the glowing water. The serpent hesitated, its eyes flicking between Valerio and the ship, as if torn between two masters. "The chain must break," Elias shouted, thrusting the map into the glow, where the sea itself seemed to rise up and embrace it. A sudden silence fell, deeper than the grave. The serpent reared back, golden eyes wide with an emotion that might have been relief. Valerio's spectral form shrieked, the light in his chest splintering like shattered glass. His ship and crew dissolved into the mist, taken by the sea that claimed them, leaving only the Crimson Dagger and her breathless crew. The serpent dipped its head, eyes softening before it sank beneath the waves, leaving the water calm once more. The silence held, and then a cheer rose, raw and triumphant. Jack leaned against the mainmast, breathing hard, eyes locked with Elias, who still clutched the now empty parchment, its magic spent. They had broken the chain, but the mysteries of the sea held more than one secret, and this battle had left scars that would carry into whatever came next. Jack's gaze swept the horizon, where the first touch of dawn painted the sky with hope. "We sail on," he said, the echoes of the whispers now silent, but their meaning etched deep in the marrow of their bones. As the first rays of dawn cast their hesitant light over the sea, the Crimson Dagger drifted in a stunned silence. The crew, battered and bruised, held their breath as if exhaling might summon the ghosts back. Water dripped from the torn sails, and the remnants of battle lay scattered across the deck. Splintered wood, shattered glass, and glistening pools where phantom blades had sliced through living flesh. Jack's chest heaved as he turned to survey his crew. Isabella's hands were still gripping the wheel, knuckles pale from exertion, eyes locked on the horizon as if daring it to throw another horror their way. Elias leaned against the mast, the now empty map in his hands, staring at it with a mix of relief and haunted wonder. "Report!" Jack shouted, breaking the silence and bringing life back into his men. The crew stirred, shuffling into motion, assessing damage and gathering their wounded. A few stared at the sea where the Abyssal Serpent had disappeared, its golden eyes now just a memory in the deep. "The beast is gone, Captain," Elias said, pushing himself to stand straighter, his voice laced with fatigue. "But whatever that map led us to, it was more than just the serpent's lair. We touched something older, something that still watches." Before Jack could respond, a low moan echoed across the water. A shadow fell over the deck as another ship emerged from the thinning mist, this one intact and fiercely real, sails taut and emblazoned with a crest Jack recognized with a sinking heart, the hawk-winged sigil of Commodore Hawthorne. "Looks like we have company," Isabella muttered, her eyes sharpening with the readiness of a hawk. The naval frigate was imposing, its polished cannons gleaming with a menace that no serpent or specter could rival in cold precision. "Prepare to be boarded," came the booming voice of Commodore Hawthorne himself, a figure clad in blue and gold, a feathered hat perched imperiously on his head. His face, lined and scarred by years of merciless pursuit, betrayed nothing but iron resolve. Jack stepped forward, his heart a drumbeat of defiance. "Commodore Hawthorne," he called out, voice carrying over the water, "you've come a long way just to see my ship. Are you looking for a tour?" Hawthorne's eyes narrowed, sharp as a cutlass. "Captain Jack, I am here for more than pleasantries. Surrender your ship, your crew, and whatever cursed relic you've unearthed in these god-forsaken waters." A murmur rippled through the crew. Some clutched their blades tighter, while others exchanged glances edged with panic. The memory of Valerio's ship and the serpent's eyes still haunted them, and now a mortal threat loomed with loaded cannons and disciplined men. Isabella's voice was low, for Jack's ears alone. "We can't fight them, not with the ship torn up and the men in this state." Elias stepped forward, the empty map still in his hand. "There may be another way," he said, eyes darting to the glowing water that still shimmered with an unnatural hue. "If we can tap into what's left." "Enough, Elias," Jack said sharply, then softened as he met his quartermaster's gaze. "There's no telling what that power might do now. We'll face this on our terms." Hawthorne's voice cut through their exchange. "Decide quickly, Captain, or I'll make the decision for you." Jack's jaw tightened as he glanced around at his crew, men and women who had faced death in its myriad forms and come through the other side, only to be threatened now by the iron will of the Navy. He stepped to the edge of the ship, arms raised in a gesture of defiance and surrender mixed. "Commodore," Jack began, a dangerous smile tugging at his lips, "if you want what we've found, you'll have to take it from the heart of the sea itself." Before Hawthorne could react, Jack turned and barked to Isabella, "Get us moving." Into the glow, Isabella's eyes widened, but she didn't hesitate. The wheel spun under her hands and the Crimson Dagger lurched, sails snapping as they caught what little wind there was. The glow of the water brightened, pulsing in time with the thundering hearts of the crew. Hawthorne's eyes flared with rage, and he shouted orders, the frigate's cannons booming to life. The first shot splashed dangerously close, sending up a spray that drenched the deck, but the Crimson Dagger surged ahead, cutting through the unnatural waters that lit the sea beneath like liquid fire. The glow grew until it surrounded them, illuminating the ship and crew in a ghostly radiance. Elias clutched the map, its edges fraying as the last of its power bled into the sea. His voice was a whisper, carried to Jack on the wind. The heart must be given or claimed. A sudden tremor rocked the ship, and beneath them, the water rose in a pillar of light. It coalesced into the form of a giant eye, ancient and all-seeing. The naval frigate halted abruptly, its crew staring in terror as the glow reached out like spectral tendrils, holding them in place. Hawthorne's shout turned into a strangled cry, cut off as the sea's voice filled the air. Deep, mournful, and final. The heart has been awakened. Jack turned to his crew, every face lit with the unearthly glow, eyes wide with awe and fear. "We've entered the unknown," he said, voice steady in the surreal calm. "Now, we make it out alive." The waters surged once more, pulling them deeper into the mystery, past the reach of cannonballs and curses, into the heart of the sea's most ancient secret. The water's glow pulsed with an otherworldly energy that enveloped the Crimson Dagger, casting it adrift in a realm that seemed to straddle the line between the living sea and an ancient, forgotten abyss. The light, once fearsome and unknown, now hummed with a calm, almost sentient awareness. Jack stood at the bow, senses sharpened, eyes set on the expanse of illuminated water that held them captive. Behind him, the crew whispered prayers and oaths, their hands white-knuckled on railings and ropes. Even Isabella, who had navigated through tempests and shadowed coves, wore a mask of awe and apprehension. Elias clutched the now empty map to his chest, its power having dissipated into the sea itself. It was a husk, a relic of a story that was not yet fully told. "Captain!" A shout from one of the lookouts jarred the silence. "The frigate. It's anchored, sir. They've stopped pursuit." Jack turned to see the naval frigate, sails furled, rocking uneasily on the edge of the glowing expanse. Commodore Hawthorne stood on the bow of his ship, his expression one of incredulity tinged with frustration. The man's iron gaze faltered as tendrils of light licked at the waterline of his vessel, testing, probing, like a predator gauging its prey. Jack's lips curled into a smirk, but the relief was fleeting. The sea had not finished with them. The glow beneath the Crimson Dagger shifted, intensifying until a tremor ran through the ship. The crew stumbled, shouts of alarm rising as the water seemed to rise, forming spiraling columns that moved with the grace of dancers and the weight of storms. Elias's voice was low and trembling as he stared into the phosphorescent depths. The heart of the sea. It's awake. The largest column coalesced, forming into a translucent human-like figure that towered over both ships. Its features were carved from water and light, eyes ancient and knowing, gazing down at the mortals who dared disturb its slumber. When it spoke, its voice resonated deep within the chest, more felt than heard. "Who among you has called upon the chains of the deep?" A silence fell so complete that even the creaking of the ship seemed to bow to it. Jack swallowed hard, stepping forward to the prow, eyes locked with the sea's embodiment. "I am Captain Jack, and we sought the heart not for power but for freedom, from the chains that bind us all." The spirit's eyes flared, the glow rippling across the surface of the water. Behind him, Elias whispered urgently, "It won't spare us, unless it believes we are worthy, Jack. We need to show it that we are not conquerors but seekers." The spirit turned its gaze to Elias, a flicker of recognition passing through its luminescent features. The whispers returned, threading through the air like the last notes of a fading song. "You know the cost." Elias's eyes widened as the whispers clawed at his mind, filling it with images of the past. Valerio's downfall, the serpent's binding, and the price paid to guard secrets too potent for man. His jaw set, determination pushing the fear from his eyes. The map was never meant to be a key to fortune, but to remembrance. It is a bond, a promise made by those who knew the cost of defying the sea. Jack's eyes met Elias's, understanding dawning like a storm breaking. He turned back to the spirit. "We are here not just to claim the heart, but to lay down the burden that has claimed too many before us. To break the cycle." The spirit's features softened and it nodded, the light within its form dimming slightly, as if the sea itself had sighed. "Then the chain shall break, and the heart shall rest." The columns of water slowly receded, folding back into the sea with a final thunderous crash that sent a wave rolling beneath the ships. The glow faded, replaced by the soft blue of dawn that crept across the sky. The Crimson Dagger floated, battered but unharmed, while the frigate remained anchored, its crew silent and awestruck. Jack's shoulders slumped as the tension drained from his body. He turned to his crew, who stared wide-eyed at the now placid sea. "It's done," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "We sail for home." Elias looked down at the lifeless map in his hand and released it, watching as the parchment fluttered into the sea, carried away by the gentle lap of waves. The crew erupted into cheers, relief and exhaustion mingling as they embraced and clapped each other on the back. Isabella walked up to Jack, her eyes shining with pride and lingering fear. "Not many would have dared the path you chose, Captain." Jack met her gaze, a tired smile breaking across his sun-worn face. "Not many have the crew I do." Aboard the frigate, Commodore Hawthorne watched, jaw clenched and eyes smoldering with unspent rage. But he made no move, nor did he order the cannons to fire. Even a man like Hawthorne knew when he stood before something greater than empire or gold. As the Crimson Dagger turned with the rising wind, leaving the Shoals of Perdition behind, the sea resumed its usual song, the whispers fading to memory. But deep in the heart of every sailor on board, the truth remained. They had not just witnessed a legend, they had become part of one, bound forever to the sea and its stories. And as Captain Jack guided his ship into the horizon, eyes set on the next adventure, the echoes of the past whispered promises of new secrets waiting beneath the waves, in a world where courage could change fate, and the sea always held the last word. The Crimson Dagger sailed under the growing light of morning, its sails billowing with a wind that felt like a gift after the suffocating calm of the shoals. The crew moved with the rhythm of survivors, steps cautious yet determined, eyes stealing glances at the waves, as if expecting the glow to return, or ghostly faces to rise from the deep. But the sea had settled, and with it, a strange peace had descended upon the battered ship. Captain Jack stood at the wheel, fingers tracing the familiar wood as if drawing strength from it. The map was gone, consumed by the very sea that had birthed it, and the haunting whispers had been silenced. Yet in their place there lingered an understanding that ran deeper than any treasure could. Elias approached, eyes shadowed with fatigue, but burning with a newfound resolve. "Captain," he said, voice low, "the men wonder what comes next. They speak of this day like a tale meant for the ages." Jack's eyes softened as he looked at his quartermaster, the man who had held their fate in his hands and chosen to steer them away from the lure of power. "It is a tale, Elias, but not the kind that ends here. We've seen the edge of legend and returned to tell of it. And now we sail for the port of Craven's End. Let the world hear of the day the Crimson Dagger met the heart of the sea and lived to boast." Elias nodded, a smile ghosting across his lips as he glanced at the horizon, where the sky blushed with the first touch of sunrise. The sea stretched before them, vast and shimmering, as if offering them a clean slate, a path unmarked by shadow or chain. "Land sighted!" came a shout from the crow's nest. A wave of relief swept the deck, laughter breaking out as the crew rushed to the railings. The sight of the distant coastline, dotted with the dark shapes of clustered buildings and the faint spire of a lighthouse, was a balm to their strained spirits. Isabella released the wheel, shaking out her cramped hands, and shot Jack a look of wry amusement. "I'll wager half the gold we find next that tales of this journey will make us legends." Jack's mouth twitched into a grin. "You'd lose that wager, Isabella. We were legends before today, now we're something else." He glanced back at Elias and the crew. Something untold. The Crimson Dagger glided forward, the familiar scents of earth and wood smoke drifting on the breeze. But before the ship could dock, a shadow fell over the deck. Jack's eyes narrowed as he looked up to see Commodore Hawthorne's frigate, trailing them but keeping a careful distance. The Commodore stood at the prow, face set in an expression Jack could only read as grudging respect. Hawthorne's voice carried over the water, stern and unyielding. "Captain Jack, you've walked a path no man should, yet you return alive. The crown demands answers, but today I allow you your tale." The crew watched as Hawthorne's ship slowly turned away, the sails catching the morning wind. The naval vessel receded into the distance, its threat deferred but not forgotten. Jack exhaled, the tension in his chest easing, and nodded. "And so it begins," he murmured. He turned to Isabella and Elias. "Let's make land, my friends. We have a story to share." The Crimson Dagger slid into the bay, its hull creaking as it embraced the stillness of the port waters. Ropes were thrown, and boots met solid ground for the first time in days that had felt like lifetimes. The crew disembarked, laughter mixing with shouts, and the creak of the bustling docks as word of their return spread like wildfire. Jack stayed behind for a moment, eyes scanning the sea one last time. The sun now blazed in full, casting a golden path over the waves. Somewhere beyond that horizon, mystery still stirred, waiting for those brave or foolish enough to chase them. Isabella called out from the gangplank, a rare softness in her voice. "Coming, Captain." Jack's eyes met hers and he nodded, stepping down to join her and the crew. The tales of their adventure would grow in the telling, sparking dreams of daring and whispers of unseen depths. And while the legend of the Heart of the Sea would live on, Captain Jack and the crew of the Crimson Dagger knew that the sea, with its endless secrets, was always just one call away from claiming them once more. With a last look over his shoulder at the beckoning blue, Jack stepped into the throng of the port, his heart racing not from fear, but from the anticipation of whatever adventure lay next. The whisper of the sea echoed in his mind, a promise and a challenge. The Crimson Dagger would sail again, and the sea would be waiting. If you enjoyed this tale, join us at You Pirate for more epic adventures on the high seas. Like, share, and subscribe to Set Sail with Captain Jack and uncover the next legend waiting just beyond the horizon. Until then, keep your wits sharp and your eyes on the tide. Adventure is only ever one breath away.